Hey everyone, welcome to San Antonio Startup Week, a very special session. We have Dr. Cynthia Phelps of Inner Ally here today, and somehow I got pulled into this. I got the short straw out of everybody who drew this, but I'm here to be a guinea pig, so rest easy. You're not going to hear me talk and moderate or do any of those other things like the other videos or sessions. This is really here for Dr. Phelps, and she's going to share some really awesome tips and a little bit of a workshop actually about how we can create a better balance in our mental health and well-being during these times of COVID. So with that, Cynthia, please.
Well, I'm excited to be here today because we're going to do something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is giving you a tool to be able to take an inner critic voice and turn it into an inner ally voice. So, that sounds kind of easy, right?
Easier said than done.
Easier said than done, but it really is a process and it is part of a practice. It is a way of treating yourself with kindness and support. And so, that sounds a little bit fluffy, right?
A little bit.
A little bit. Well, in fact, it's backed by about 18 years of research that shows that if you're able to treat yourself with kindness and support, you're going to have lower levels of anxiety, stress, and depression. And my research shows that you're also going to be less at risk for substance abuse and alcoholism. So that in and of itself is amazing, right?
It's a win-win right there.
But because we're entrepreneurs, it also does a variety of other things. If you can be your best supporter, it turns out that you're going to be better at innovating and creating new things. You're going to be more productive, and you're going to have better interpersonal relationships. Those both at work and also your personal relationships. So there's kind of not really a downside to learning how to do this. So that's what we're going to be doing here today.
I feel like you're putting me at ease, and I appreciate that.
Good.
But that's good. Those are all things I need right now because it's really, really stressful right now.
Right, and so we should mention that, right? Entrepreneurs already face an enormous amount of uncertainty in their daily lives. And that takes mere mortals out, right? What we face in a regular week, maybe. And so with what's happening with the pandemic and the uncertainty that's being caused from that, and actually some of the real damage in relationships, isolation, all of these things, the loss and the grief. So this is a research-backed way of being able to help yourself and really improve your mental health and your resilience. It's going to be awesome.
So I feel like this is going to be a really great opportunity and tool to help me re-energize, recharge. The last 6 months have been, no matter how well prepared I guess I've been doing things, draining bit by bit by bit, but I haven't really found that thing to help me really find the thing that fills up the battery again. So that sounds like that's what it might be able to do for me.
It's going to be really helpful. And as you know, I'm actually one of the founding members of Mindfulness in San Antonio. And so, there's a variety of things that we can do to help improve our mental health and our resilience. I really like to call it mental well-being, because these things don't require that you have a problem. There are things that we can do and practice on a regular basis to be able to kind of pump up what I call our emotional fitness. And so, you're really familiar with having to maintain your body to be fit, right? You go to the gym or you go walking, you have things that you practice on a regular basis. And so emotional fitness is the same way. If we want to have high levels of well-being and really that resilience, which, the definition of resilience is when basically the world throws problems at you, you're kind of like the palm tree. You just bend and come back and instead of snapping, right? And so that's perfect in times like this. And so, mindfulness is actually one of the first parts in practicing this, primarily because if we're not aware of how we're speaking to ourselves, it's going to be really hard to do any change. And so any type of mindfulness practice that you might have, maybe like a small meditation practice or just the act of noticing kind of how you're doing in the moment, all of those are really useful so that you can tap into like, oh, kind of what's the chatter that's going on in my head, right?
Yeah, it's funny that you put it like that, because I think everybody can relate to the fact that there's something going on always, a background dialogue that you almost become almost immune to. It just becomes background noise, but it does have an effect. So I'm interested to go through the exercise, hear what my background chatter is. I'm a little nervous about it when it comes out in translation, but it'll be good because you're gonna show me some ways to be able to help turn that around, it sounds like.
Right. So one of the ways that I found to be able to help people with this is to focus on the inner critic. This is really usually pretty easy because people are somewhat in touch with what their inner critic says. It's somewhat more noticeable. I wanted to start there because something like the stress of a pandemic can actually ramp up your inner critic. It can really get mouthy and might have a lot to say under times of stress.
Super mouthy.
So think to yourself, is there some kind of internal chatter that has been going on that is making you feel uneasy, or are there some worries about your business or your relationships right now as a result of the added stress of the pandemic? Just focus in on that and see if you can actually verbalize for yourself what that voice is saying, what it's saying to you. And so this is part of the guinea pig part, Dax.
The part I was a little nervous about, but I'm ready more or less to be vulnerable, I guess.
That's wonderful. Vulnerability is power.
There we go. Just keep repeating that to me as we display this for the
Brene
world.
Brown has a lot of research on that, so I'm not making it up, just to make you feel better.
Yeah, no, you are a doctor, so I trust you.
So, Dax, if you would want to share with us, do you have an inner critic voice that is kind of gotten worse, maybe, as a result of the extra stress right now?
Yes, I definitely am aware of the inner critic, or kind of the running dialogue. There are some things that I do in practice to help maintain kind of a healthy mindset. And in an outset, I found Stoic philosophy in books, kind of writings around that to kind of help understand logic and my emotion and how I feel. But I've definitely noticed over the past few months a big ramp up. I very badly want to do things well and support the people around me or the communities around me. And that leads to sometimes unrealistic expectations that I put on myself. There's only 24 hours in a day, and I try and stuff 26 or 27 hours worth of activities into that. So little things like that have kind of added up, and I realized.
Little things, he says.
Yeah, exactly, I'm already like minimizing it, but something like that's actually something very real that I've always battled, especially as I've gotten more in touch and a part of this startup and entrepreneurship community and found so many people like-minded and caring. It ramps up my desire to want to take care of them because they're caring for others too. So that's definitely been something. I think you said mouthy, and I was like, yep, he's getting a little mouthy right now. So.
And so if we were live, this is where I would turn and say, like, okay, raise your hand if you have some similar inner critic to Dax, where it sounds something like, I'm not doing enough, or what does it really sound like in your words if you were to verbalize what it's saying to you?
When you said I'm not doing enough, that just struck it right in the center. Yeah, like right, I was like, yep, that's it, that's the word.
And I also heard, I think, the word perfect or something along the line. So it's like, do you ever get something like, I don't want to screw this up, or something along those lines?
It usually takes the form of, these people or this mission really matters, and I can't afford to not do what is needed to get done. Yeah.
That's good. That's good. And it's interesting, because oftentimes the inner critic has a reason for existing, right? So that phrase that you just said, like, I want to be able to do enough, that's actually can be very motivating. But sometimes it tips, like the scale all of a sudden goes from like, yes, like, I put on my cape, save all the startups at the beginning of the day, and then at the end of the day, you're like, oh. And so the inner critic voice is actually there because it wants to look out for you. And so it has some wisdom. It just has terrible methods of trying to get it done.
It seems like the timing can sometimes be off as well. Right when I don't need to hear it is when the little voice starts getting a little louder.
And that's exactly right. It shows up most during times of stress, uncertainty, exactly, in times like these. And so, recognizing that it's there for a purpose to help you or protect you can be important. And then, what I like to use a metaphor where I just take it and I said, okay, I hear you. And I'll just put you on the shelf. And you can just stay right here. And, I don't think we're ever going to get rid of the inner critic. But what we can is just kind of take the focus off of it. Because so much of what's in our heads is negative. And this has been shown by research. I think it's something like 80%. It's called the negativity bias. And so we actually have a tendency to remember the negative things and kind of reinforce those in our head more than the positive. It makes sense because it comes from basic human survival. Like the people who remembered where the tiger lived and
that makes a lot of sense.
Responded well to that. Those are our people. That's who we are from. And so, but in kind of modern society, we can't always have that turned on, that stress response turned on. And so, being mindful of the inner critic, noticing what it's saying to us, acknowledging that some of it can be useful. I mean, sometimes inner critic can be very harsh and name calling, and in which case, you don't have to keep any of that.
Yeah. Don't put that on the shelf and look at it. That's the stuff we discard.
Well, you may not be able to discard it. It may still be there bothering you, but minimize it, type of a thing, rather than keep it central. As you practice this, you're going to notice that it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Sometimes you can get it to go away, but that's like monk level stuff, right?
I got a ways to go.
I've got a ways to go. And so, all right, so let's get back to your inner critic. Right now, what's the thing that it's saying to you that's kind of most irritating?
I would say that it's the inner critic in me is basically giving me this message that as if I don't understand the stakes involved of what I'm working on. So it's like actually thinking like, oh, hey, dummy, you don't really know how important this is. And I 100% know how important the work that I do and the communities I'm trying to serve and help. I know what this impact could be. But at times it's almost as if it's trying to tell me like, no, you don't. So let me explain.
Yep.
Okay. So what it's telling me is almost as if it's acting like I don't know how important the work that I'm doing, like its impact, its reach, or the personal value to myself as well. So it just kind of like knocks inside, like, hey, dummy, this is real important. Don't mess it up. Don't mess it up. There's people who need you. There's things that have to happen, and like you need to deliver this because this is uber important. I already know that, so it almost adds this really weird level of extra stress to me without even hearing anything from anybody on the outside. It's all internal, right? So that's where I would kind of characterize it.
So let me paraphrase for you the exact words that your inner critic is using, because it's important that we start with those. Hey, dummy, this is really important, and said in a very condescending way.
Yes.
Like, you better not screw this up. Are those like the main parts?
Those are the main parts, yeah.
So tell me, in your body, when you hear that inner critic say that to you, how does that make you feel?
It adds a weird extra level of like physical stress. And I've noticed it, especially over the past few weeks. If I get a crick in my neck or my shoulders get tense, it becomes like soreness. Like, so it physically is manifesting itself in some ways that normally that I can work out or walk or run or do whatever and kind of balance it. But I've realized lately some of those aches and pains linger. And I think the other thing is it adds to my own feeling of frustration because I know I'm doing the work. I know I'm working towards the target. I'm trying to remind myself of that. But then when I hear that little inner critic just throw in their 2 cents, then it's just like, oh man, this is becoming, it starts to feel insurmountable. And then it's overwhelming if I'm not careful. And that's the battle I get locked in is how do I remind myself to like get there? So that's that feeling. It's frustration and kind of locked in this pitched battle with an inner dialogue trying to, let it know. I know it's busy, lots of things going on, but I'm doing the work and it's going to get there.
Right. Well, it sounds like you actually already have a little bit of inner ally speak inside of you.
That's good. That's good.
So we've got stuff to start with. Oftentimes when I'm working with people, when they define their inner critic, I have them say, look, how does that feel in your body? And oftentimes people have a difficulty time understanding that because, I'm a type of person who I solve problems with my brain, and I walk around, I'm like a walking brain. And so I rarely stop to consider how my body is feeling. But when we look at emotions are actually felt in the body. So like when you feel anger, some people feel it really as a tightening of the chest or you can feel surprise as like a rush on your whole body or love, as a warmth over like the whole core of your body. So emotions are very physiological. And so what's cool about that is that we can use that as kind of barometer to see how you're doing on that internal language. So you just described that your body feels kind of tense and anxious and maybe even leading to some longer term, issues with your physical issues, right? Yeah. So the exercise, so this is the tool. We're going to create some inner ally phrases for you, or at least one. And so this is that kind and supportive phrase that research shows will actually help you improve your well-being and your resilience. And so usually the way that we start that is by focusing in on that inner critic phrase that you had. And I think maybe we could start with the "you're not doing enough," right?
Okay. Yes.
Because that's kind of the key piece.
That's the big one. That's the bully in the room, I think.
Okay, good. Okay, so if you were to turn that around and make a phrase that I call equal and opposite, where it's equal in its strength, right? But it's opposite in where it's trying to take you. Maybe not where it's trying to take you, but it's opposite in the method that it takes you there, right?
Okay.
This kind and supportive way. What would that sound like for you?
I would say it would be acknowledging I'm doing plenty of work in the areas that matter most to me. Yeah.
Perfect. So if you were to say that in a first person, can you?
I'm gonna try. I'm gonna see if I can spit the words out. I'm doing enough work in the areas that matter most to me.
Beautiful. So if we were coaching, I'd be like, write that down. Because these are really important to work with. Your inner ally phrases, sometimes they need a little bit of tending. Something that will work for you right away may stop working, or you just kind of becomes meh, and you need to shift it a little bit. And so the first thing that I ask is, how does that feel in your body when you say that?
My shoulders loosened up for sure.
Just a little bit?
Just a little bit. I felt that, and I actually felt a rush of confidence with hearing myself actually say the physical words instead of just thinking of it.
One more time.
Right? I'm going to see if I can remember it. I'm doing enough work in the areas that matter most to me.
Ooh, that makes me feel good too.
Good.
So one of the things that you can do is pay attention to the first part of the phrase. When we say an I am phrase, it's very powerful. But some days you're going to wake up and you're going to say, I am doing enough work in the areas that really matter to me. And your inner critic's going to go, Are you kidding? Have you looked at your task list lately? Oh my gosh, what a faker.
There you go. Maybe a dummy thrown in there or something like
Dummy, all right.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
So one thing that you can do is you can change the first part of your phrase. Instead of starting with I am, which is great when you're feeling strong, you can start with may I. And there it's almost like it's a wish, where you know you're here, you know where you really want to be is here, and then, there's a little gap, right? And all entrepreneurs we are all very aware of our gap. Of what we want to do and what we want to be and then where we really are, right? And so sometimes when we're struggling, it's helpful to say, may I do my best work so that I can, whatever, what was your phrase again?
Into the matters and issues that matter most to me, and the areas that matter most
There
to me.
you go. So you could just switch it out to start with a may I.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that you can do to make sure that that's really going to fit for you. So when your inner critic starts to go ha 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 and is laughing at you, that's a perfect time to bring in the may I. Because one of the things it does is it disarms the inner critic a bit, because you're just wishing for it. And so, the inner critic doesn't have a whole lot to say.
That feels aspirational to me as well. Like, I'm very geared towards achievement and competition, and my Clifton Strengths Finders are both in my top 5. So I know that this voice or the motivation, like you mentioned earlier, is a gear for me that actually creates traction. I know it gets me out of bed, it gets me motivated, it gets me thinking about things and getting things done in ways that other people may not be prepared to do, but everything has its limits. So hearing that actually gets me thinking about, how can I do that today? Like, may I? It's like, well, I may, because I'm going to try and look at some of these things throughout my day. It's an aspirational goal to achieve, which that feels really good to me. That's a nice, I'm not going to stand every morning and proudly and confidently declare I am doing enough, because some days I'm like, am I? I don't know. Right. May I?
Okay, may I?
That's a good trick to use when you're not feeling quite as confident. Yeah. And so one of the things that I've developed for my company is actually a set of inner ally characters, because it's another way to kind of soften this language to allow ourselves to use it more freely. So the research that's behind this is actually called self-compassion. This is the concept that we're dealing with here, being kind and supportive of self, especially during times of struggle. So when I teach self-compassion, I teach an 8-week course on it. I've got an online course coming up. I have to spend at least an hour with people talking about why it's useful and all of the misconceptions about it. Because people think, oh, if I'm kind to myself, then, I'm just going to become lazy, self-indulgent, that's narcissistic. Oh, I'm a person that takes care of other people and don't put myself first. All of these things have been completely dismissed by research, but they're very tightly held onto by our psyche. Like, it doesn't want to let go of these misconceptions, because it's almost like a physical fear comes up a little bit, like if I'm too kind to myself, something bad will happen. And so that's why I created the Inner Allies, because they're based on something called your core emotions. And these are things that we all need. There's probably about 16 to 18 of them, depending on which body of research you look at. But they're things like companionship and support, community, love, freedom. Each of us actually have some of these needs for these, well, I call them emotional superpowers. And oftentimes it comes from maybe something we didn't get in our childhood, or some experience that we've been through, or who knows, it could just be genetic. But you can actually take a quiz that's on my website to find out who your inner ally is. And they're all based on these core emotions. And so worthiness is actually the one that you described when you talked about what your inner critic says, because your inner critic says you're not doing enough, you're not enough, you're not worthy. And so the character that's associated that is the cheerleader.
I don't think anybody needs to see a graphic image of me in a cheerleader outfit, pom-poms or anything, but that's good to know.
Right.
And that makes sense, the worthiness, because earlier in my career, that's definitely something, it was the chip on my shoulder that it took a long time for me to mature and learn out of, but at times it crops up. And so it's good to know that there's a variation that I can turn that into to help me through these kinds of times.
Absolutely. And that's kind of why, like, the third party, if you will, of the inner ally is useful. You know, it doesn't have to be you in the cheerleading skirt, right? It can be your inner cheerleader, a character that's in your head. And sometimes it helps because it's hard for us to say kind words to ourselves. And so if you're experiencing that kind of a difficulty, I would encourage you to understand kind of who that character is that you really need support from to be kind and supportive to yourself. So that's another way that you can really try to hone some of your inner language around these core emotional needs, because I call them core emotional needs because that's what they are in the research, but really I describe it like this in terms of emotional fitness. So I think everybody has seen that guy at the gym who only does upper body, right?
Yes,
And never does leg day, right? So your core emotional need is like your own personal leg day, like for that guy, right? Like it's the thing that you could use a little beefing up on. And so it's not that it's bad. I mean, all of us have this type of a thing that we can, if we tend to it and we can actually put some time and effort and practice into it, we can really improve our resilience, because that's kind of like our weak spot. And so it's a little bit different than, you know, always focusing on your strengths and always going there as an entrepreneur. You know, that's in your emotions, they just work a little differently.
Yeah. And I know that I've personally seen this in talking with other entrepreneurs or even people within the community. I'm so glad we're having this conversation and we're sharing this with everyone, because there also are some stigmas and kind of cultural touchstones around what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur that have been permeating for decades. You know, tough, resilient, gritty, do anything to get anywhere and, you know, win at all costs and do all these things. And the moment someone shows a little bit of vulnerability or says, hey, I need to take a minute and think about how I'm feeling and thinking, because if I'm not at my best, how am I possibly going to be able to do my best with my goal and my mission or whatever that might be? So I really enjoy exploring these kinds of topics because I think entering into it, that was exactly what it is. We're, you know, for some of us here in my certain age demographic, I learned a lot of business from prior generations of how they approached leadership and business. And it is so different from the younger generations. So this is really some awesome bridge work that I'm learning right now that I can share with people that I mentor and talk to, or even peer group, because this is very real. Like, you're saying some things in the last couple of minutes that are just going right to the heart of some things that I've always been thinking in my head, how I approach. So this is really, really valuable work that people should invest time into.
So practice is actually a really important part. And when I do this with my clients, I actually have cards. Hey, thank you. Inner ally cards.
There we go.
And so this is the cast of characters. You can go ahead and take a look.
Very cool.
And so it has like the core emotional need up here, and then it has a description of the character and just a little bit of language, kind of like how this character speaks, so that you can adopt it for yourself. And on the back of the card, they're lined. And the idea here is, just like you created that phrase, like, I am worthy, or I am able to do amazing work to help startups. I'm paraphrasing.
I'll take it.
But right, you can actually write that phrase down. And I encourage people to put these in their wallet, carry them around, stick them on the bathroom mirror, whatever works for you, because it's all about practice. And so the more that we can pull this into our regular life, the better. And so it starts with that mindfulness of like, oh, I realize I'm being a jerk to myself right now.
And that right there, just in and of itself, I will tell everybody, if you can just take that first step and identify that you are being a jerk to yourself, that was a huge step when I started trying to understand what my inner critic, now I have some words to describe it, was doing things and why I was stressing out. So even just taking a small step like that, identifying something's not quite right is, I mean, you tell me, it feels like that's the first step in the right direction.
So basically, one of the things that the inner allies can do is they really can give you permission. And that's one thing that I didn't really feel like I had. Not only did I not have any inner language that was kind and supportive, I didn't feel like I was allowed to. And so sometimes when I'm working with people, I help them add to their phrases things like, I have permission to, or I am able to, as a way to help out with that. Like if you don't feel like it's okay to be kind to yourself, you can add some of those words. And so with creating this inner ally language, it's really about coming up with a phrase and then testing it on yourself and kind of going, how does that land in my body? Does it make me go like, oh, like, you know, you said, was your response like, oh, your shoulders dropped a little bit? And that's the kind of response that you want. And oftentimes, if you're doing this for the first time, you may not be able to be in touch with what's going on in your body, but you can continue to practice. And the more that you ask yourself that question is, how does it really feel on the inside? Then the better you're going to be at mindfulness of noticing when you're saying something to yourself that feels really crappy. You know, I'm actually ruining my day right now.
Yeah, self-sabotage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imposter syndrome, self-sabotage, inner critic. These are all things I title my workshops. It's all the same stuff.
I think this is really powerful, and I love the cards. I think these are really cool. And I know that you've spent, I mean, just the quality, but also just identifying a character I think is really important. And again, like for everybody out there, they're really cool. And I think it's like a nice reminder, something easy to keep on your desk, kind of within easy grasp, or even a daily reminder just to say and be like, cheerleader, right, I need to let myself know I can do this today. I've got it, I'm already doing it, I'm mindful of it. Again, just walking through that process and having that daily reminder physically there with you also it's just nice. It's comforting in some ways to know that it's not just gonna have to be a mental reminder, but something that's tangible in the real world that can, it feels like almost take you out of just the inner dialogue and actually kind of shock you in and be like, remember, cheerleader, or whatever the power might be, the captain, the monk, the lover.
You know,
You're
all
on
those
to
things.
me.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm trying to do. Yeah, and one of the things with the characters is, we were talking earlier, you know, we've both been through therapy. And I think therapy is great. I like do a lot of it if you can, if you've got the money. But it tends to be really serious, you know? And so one of the things that the inner allies can do is add a little bit of levity, you know? So all self-help does not need to be very like, okay, now we're going to improve ourselves and take this very seriously.
It is. It's really, really hard work, and it feels intensive work. This feels like something that you can do and maintain. Like you said, it's the gradual building of the muscle, not the shock value of what's going on. It's not shocking the system into addressing something. It's the gradual implementation of a new routine to really develop that, to say, like, eventually get to that point where you're waking up confident and positive and putting some of my self-worthiness issues to bed, or at least in a very deep sleep.
I love that. Yeah, and also, you know, it's important to remember, just like going to the gym, sometimes when you practice, you're kind of like, meh, that didn't feel like I did anything. You know, sometimes you just have one of those days, but that doesn't mean that it's not helping.
Yeah.
Cynthia, this has been fantastic. I really, I wasn't sure where we were going to go with this at the very beginning. I think some of our folks watching at home were probably maybe not too sure, but how can people get a hold of you or kind of learn a little bit more? You mentioned something on your website, like a test that they can take or a little quiz. So where's that again?
Innerally.com.
Okay, perfect. I know I'm definitely going to go take that after this, and we're going to follow up on some things. But I can't help but I'd be remiss not to tell people out there, if I can sit here and kind of talk in this conversation, you may not see it, but there's a production crew around us. So we got very real right here in this conversation. But if I can sit and discuss with someone about where I'm at and a little bit of a challenge, that's the first step, getting a little bit of support. Cynthia's been an amazing member of our community, and the fact that she's building these tools for folks just like us and others is fantastic. I highly encourage you all to check out interally.com. And if there's anything at all that she can do for you, I'm sure you can message her, get in contact on the website, and she'll be more than happy to help you out conquering your inner critics.
Wonderful. If you even can just get one inner ally phrase for yourself, one little kind and supportive phrase, you're really headed in the right direction.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Dax. You did great.
So thank you again, Dr. Phelps, for helping us out with everything. Keep tuning in to San Antonio Startup Week. We've got tons of great programming. We have a few other sessions around mental health and well-being. We've got Julia Bates doing a session with us as well. But again, huge thank you so much for doing this. And I cannot wait to see these cards on a lot of desks in our community around Geekdom and some other offices in San Antonio. Thanks.